Today's episode of Radical Personal Finance is sponsored by Nomad Capitalist Live. Nomad Capitalist Live is back this year here in the Western Hemisphere in Cancun, Mexico. It will take place November 4 to November 7 of this year, 2026. So again, November 4 through the 7th in Cancun, Mexico. Nomad Capitalist Live is the world's leading event for global citizens, where top entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders share actionable strategies for protecting wealth, securing second citizenships, and navigating today's economic uncertainty. I'll be speaking at this year's event, this year back for the third year in a row. I'll be alongside the former president of Mexico, Vicente Fox Quesada, author Juan Pablo Escobar, who's the son of famed Pablo Escobar, Danielle DiMartino Booth, former Federal Reserve advisor, and former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer. I love that title, by the way. Chancellor of the Exchequer and serial entrepreneur Kwasi Kwarteng, and, of course, many other experts. This is your opportunity to learn directly from world-class professionals who offer insights on staying ahead in a rapidly changing global landscape. And boy, isn't that true, looking at the political intrigues of recent weeks. Discover proven legal strategies to optimize your taxes, diversify your family's options, and build a resilient international plan B for your future. Tickets now on sale at nomadcapitalist.com/live. I'll be this year to speak, to learn, and as always, I will make myself enormously available to just hang out with you. So buy your tickets today at nomadcapitalist.com/live. They went on sale early this morning. And come enjoy some hot topics, hot debate, and cold drinks with me on the warm, sunny sands of Cancun, Mexico. You won't want to miss it. nomadcapitalist.com/live. Welcome to Radical Personal Finance. My name is Joshua Sheets, and today, in celebration of Tax Day, I would like to talk about money and government. I would like to ask you a question. Are you getting a good deal on your taxes? Now, for the last few years, and this year included, interestingly, Tax Day in the United States, April 15th, has aligned quite closely with Tax Freedom Day, which is a day in which it's calculated that you and I as citizens basically finish paying off our taxes that we owe, and now for the rest of the year we can work for ourselves. That Tax Freedom Day varies a little bit year by year, but in the United States, it usually right now seems to fall in about the middle of April, something like April 16, according to the Tax Foundation. In Canada, it's the middle of June, something like June 8. In the United Kingdom, I think it's June 12. So our Canadian and British friends spend just under half their year working for their government, and Americans, we spend about a quarter of our year working for, about a third of our year working for our government. And so we can celebrate this week the arrival of the day in which you can finally begin to put some money in your pocket. Now, if you think about that, if you think about the fact that you and I have probably been working since about January 1 up until now to pay for our government services, should we not at some point in time stop and ask ourselves, are we getting a good deal for those services? Do you think you are getting a good deal for your money? Well, in order to answer that question, you would have to think about, what do you expect to be getting? If you go into a transaction and somebody says, hey, give me $5 and I'll give you an ice cream cone, and you hand over $5 and the guy hands you an ice cream cone, we're both satisfied. You've got your ice cream cone and he's got his $5. And that's the mark of a successful transaction. But with government and with government services, I would say that most of us don't actually know what it is we're trying to do, what it is we're supposed to be getting, and thus we don't have much of a framework to judge it by. Some people believe that what we should be getting from our government is a strong army. Some people believe that what we should be getting from our government is world-class healthcare. Some people believe that what we should be getting from our government is great laws. But how are these things defined? I can't in any way hope to, in any reasonably lengthy podcast, define those things, but I've been thinking a lot about this over the last months. As you know from podcast I released a few months ago, I've been pretty frustrated and scandalized by the amount of fraud happening in my nation of the United States. And just looking around and seeing the absolute level of fraud is absolutely frustrating to me, because fraud is the most un-American thing imaginable. The United States of America is very much a live and let live country. You can kind of do what you like. You can live how you want to live. You can enjoy life and freedom, and you can pursue happiness in your own unique way. And most of the time, we just want to leave people alone. Just leave me alone and I'll leave you alone, and we'll both pursue happiness as we see fit. But fraud breaks that. And in the United States of America, we have a very strong culture of pulling our fair share. And fraud is enormously disturbing, because not only is somebody not pulling his or her fair share, but rather it means that somebody is actively taking what rightfully belongs to other people for his own benefit. I saw Nick Shirley is the independent journalist who broke open the Somali fraud scandal in Minnesota, which had wide-reaching political ramifications there. He's continued on to do it in California and report on some of the fraud in California. And he recently interviewed Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent. And Bessent in that interview said that basically, because recently President Trump appointed a fraud task force to be led by Vice President J.D. Vance. And Treasury Secretary Bessent, when giving this interview, said that we, meaning we, the fraud task force, we think that fraud in the United States could be as much as 10% of the total federal budget. And by the way, when we talk about this kind of fraud, we're just talking outright fraud, not necessarily a fat contract, an inside deal, but just flat outright fraud, 10% of the total federal budget. Imagine that you're working on a project. Let's say that you and 9 other men are carrying the boats, right? Carrying a log, carrying a casket, something that involves each of you working together to accomplish something. And one of the 10 is not only not bearing his part of the deal, but is literally hanging there, right? Imagine you're carrying a log, 10 men on a log, but the 10th man is just kind of grabbing onto the log and going along for the ride. And so not only are you carrying the log, but you're carrying the 10th man. That is, to me, I don't want to be excessively emotional, but that is just unimaginable. And so this cuts right to the heart of some things that I consider to be utterly offensive. So back to government. What are the basic fundamental duties of government? What are those things that are the absolute duties of government that you're paying for? Because if we can figure out what those things are, we can then try to figure out, well, is the government doing a good job? In my mind, I'm a simplistic man. I'm not very well educated. I'm not very well read in political philosophy. But whenever I do this, I go back to the concept of a king and his subjects. And I imagine a local king in a good-sized kingdom, imagine several counties or perhaps a state of some kind. And I imagine, all right, let's say you have a king of a local region and you have his subjects. What is it in, say, a feudal society? What is the basic agreement between a king and his subjects? I think at the core level, it's a few basic things. The first thing that a king provides for his people is security. It's defense, to protect the realm from external enemies. If you and I were villagers, farmers, working alongside one another, we might work all summer and all spring, summer, and fall. We gather in our crops into the barns. But then our marauding neighbors come along, and they are more powerful than we are. They're better armed than we are. And so they swoop in the fall time and they raid our barns and granaries, and they take the produce away with them. That's what happened at many points, and still happens at many points in human history. So how do you defend against that? Well, what you do is you come together and you say, we need somebody who's really good at war. We need somebody who's really good at wielding the sword, wielding the gun, who can organize and develop defenses to protect us, to protect our crops. We don't want to lose 100% of our crops after the harvest. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take some of our crops or some of the money from our work. We're going to give it to somebody who is really good at war. And that person, the agreement is that you are going to protect us. So the first basic duty that a king has is to provide security from foreign invaders for his people. To protect the kingdom from invasion, from raids, and to maintain proper military readiness. How's your country doing right now? Is your king, is your leader, is your government protecting you and your neighbors from invasion by external enemies? You and I, as subjects, should judge our governments on that basis. The next thing is that a king must protect from internal evildoers. The king must maintain justice and must punish wrongdoing. Now, that can mean many things. The king must create and administer fair laws. The king must execute justice with mercy, must resolve disputes impartially, and must punish criminals or rebels or anybody who would take advantage of an innocent person. There are in all societies evildoers, evil men who will take advantage of, who will rob, who will rape, who will kill, who will destroy innocent men and women who are just going about their lives, doing nothing wrong. There are always bullies. And so what subjects of a king do is they say, we are going to give you, the king, the tools of violence. We're going to pay money, pay tribute, pay taxes to you, and you are to wield these tools of violence against the bullies. So, how well is your government doing right now at punishing the criminals in your society? How free are you right now? Are you and your wife and your children, are you able to walk in freedom and safety and security on the streets of your town? Do you go to sleep at night secure, knowing that while there may be evil in other realms, in other kingdoms, in our kingdom, we have a just king who is doing a really good job? Is that how you feel right now? I think there are other aspects of the duties of the king. Those are the clearest things. If I gave up everything else, I can't give up those. I think sometimes about the phrase, taxation is theft. I think there's probably not very many 20-year-old men who don't think about that and say, it's probably true. Taxation is theft. Hopefully we don't say it out loud, or at least we don't say it out loud too vociferously. And then after about 10 years or so, you reach your 30s and you start thinking, well, I don't think that's quite true. And I myself don't think that it's quite true that taxation is theft. I don't believe it's theft. I think that taxation is necessary because I want that security. I want to live in a place where I know that I and my neighbors, my people, are free from foreign invaders, from violent people who would seek to invade the kingdom and take what we have for themselves. And I want to know that my wife and my children are protected from evildoers, that the criminals are punished, the guilty are imprisoned or executed, and that I can dwell in peace and security. I can give up virtually all of the other functions of government because I can do a lot of the other functions of government myself through private contract. What I can't do is replace those things. I think there's a place that a king should be responsible for, creating just laws that are useful. I think that a king has a responsibility to, as part of his mandate for justice and punishment of wrongdoing, to make sure that fraudsters are held accountable, that there's sound money, that there is good quality government services, that there's orderly transactions, orderly markets. I think that without those things, we really can't reach prosperity. If we have a king that sits in his castle and yes, he's got a great army that's fighting off the bands of marauders that would want to come and take our harvest, but then we don't have a way of properly settling disputes internally and getting justice for internal disputes, we've got a problem. And so the king has the duty to provide, to uphold the laws, to uphold the customs, to maintain the peace, and to provide the environment where you and I as individuals can flourish as individuals. I think a king also has duties of leadership, that the king is responsible for setting the tone for the religious or moral leadership of the land. The king should be somebody that we look up to, and we say, I want my sons to grow up to be just like our king. How are you doing right now? How's your government? How are things failing? How are things working for you right now? If the king fails these duties, he's a tyrant, he neglects the defense of the people, he allows injustice to reign in the land, he doesn't punish the guilty, then I think the covenant of the compact between the king and his people is broken. And then I think the people are justified in resisting the king and rebelling against him, deposing him, and putting in place someone else. Now, if the king is maintaining his duties, then what do the people owe? I think they owe loyalty. They owe obedience to the king. They owe service to the king, military service, to fight when called upon. So the king can't engage in his duties to protect his people if he can't muster an army. And the people owe taxes. They owe tribute. They owe economic support for the king so that he can do his job. They owe counsel, they owe service, they owe respect. But if there's faithful service, then if the king is doing his job, then the people owe him obedience and fealty. And if the king is not doing his job, then the people do not owe him those things. How's your king doing? How's your government doing? Are you getting a good deal? I don't know how you feel about that. I feel pretty frustrated about that myself. Now, can things change? Right here we come into the wrinkles of democracy, the challenges of democracy, and the fact that, well, we're not the loyal subjects of a king by divine right. Rather, we are participating in a democratic republic, and we have the duty to vote. We have the duty to elect people, to elect representatives. And if they don't do a good job, then we can set aside those representatives and we can bring others to bear. And those are important things to do. And I don't claim at all that just thinking about this simplistically actually gives us, solves the questions in a simple way. But it's worth thinking about. So what are your solutions? Let's say that your king is doing a great job. Well, if your king is doing a great job and your family is dwelling in peace and you're able to build and pursue happiness and pursue prosperity, then I think you should be a loyal subject of the king and continue to build and continue to do those things. But what if you're getting a bad deal? What if you're spending almost half your year working, like our Canadian friends and our British friends are, and you're not getting those most basic fundamental services. What do you do? Well, you can lead a revolt. You can lead a rebellion. You can depose the king. You can take down the government. That is a possible factor, a possible thing that you can do. And some people will do that, and some people should do that. And you might be one of those people. I don't think I'm one of those people, but you might be one of those people. And if our king is doing a bad job, then I'm going to support you in that. In every age, when things get bad enough, the people rise up. And the people, if it's a democratic system, the people will vote, and they'll vote the scoundrels out, and they'll try to vote some other people in and get somebody better who's going to come in and try to fix the things that the previous scoundrels messed up. And a lot of times that works out well, or at least to some degree it works out well. In other cases, you can't. You can't, because in reality, other people are happy, but you're not happy. So what do you do? Well, I think you have the choice to make a plan and to take yourself from under one king, under one government, under one ruler, and put yourself in a different situation, under a different person. Because the reality is, we're all competing with each other, but not in the way that some people might think. So for years, I've made this statement about employees and employers. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is to think that employees are competing with employers. And that's not true. Employees are competing with other employees for a job, for work. And employers are competing with other employers for services, for workers. And if you understand that, and you understand that if you're looking for a job, you are not competing with your employer, but rather you're competing with other employees, then you can make progress. And I think the same thing is true with regard to government services. Governments are businesses. They enrich a certain group of people. They enrich a king in some systems. They enrich the politicians who are in there. We don't ever have broke presidents. And mayors and governors. They always wind up wealthy after their government service, during their government service, before their government service. And so government leaders are providing services. And so in the same way that employees are competing with other employees and employers are competing with other employers, citizens are competing with other citizens, and governments are competing with other governments. And we see this play out constantly on a daily basis. I didn't play the comments, but it was fascinating to listen to the governor, Kathy Hochul of New York, and her comments recently where she was saying, millionaires, we need you millionaires to move back to New York. Let's go, if you're rich, why don't you go down to Florida and grab some of your rich buddies and tell them, move back to New York because we need your tax money. It's interesting that states are starting to wake up and recognize that the governor of Florida is competing with the governor of New York for your business. The governor of California is competing with the governor of Texas for your business. Governors are competing with one another for your business. Mayors compete with one another for your business. Presidents, prime ministers, kings, and rulers of all kind are competing with one another for your business. And so as part of that competition, governments have to roll out a set of services and a cost to those services. And then you get to think about their offer and you get to say, am I willing to pay those services? Pay that price. And if you are, great. And if you're not, you're not. And you can make another choice. And that is always, ever since I read the book PT years ago, and I got that, which was what got me interested in internationalization stuff. That is always the thing that has fascinated me. Now, I personally am super bullish on the future of the United States of America. I think that we can, I think that we're doing okay on a lot of factors, and I think we can do great on a lot of factors. I believe deeply in the American people. I believe that we have an amazing foundation and that we can build, and I'm excited about the future. But at its core, it could all go wrong. And that's where you get into the world of saying, do I really want my children and my grandchildren to all be dependent on one place? Obviously, I'm alluding here to internationalization. And I wanted to record this show because I've been thinking about this a long time, but I wanted to do a good show that would be a good fit for today's sponsor, Nomad Capitalist Live. And Andrew Henderson of Nomad Capitalist Live, right? He has his trademarked company slogan, "Go where you're treated best." And I just think isn't that such an amazing idea that you and I get to choose. We get to go where we're treated best. And truly, that was the foundation and has been always the foundation of the American system, right? The early settlers in the United States, they were seeking to go where they were treated best. The early pilgrims were fleeing religious persecution, and they went where they would be freer. And all of the settlers that arrived, and just the wave after wave of new settlers and colonists who arrived in the United States, were seeking a land of opportunity, a place where they were going to be treated best. And I think that is just a wonderful part of our heritage. I also think it's a global phenomenon. And what's fascinating is people are waking up, right? We're in a moment. It was interesting. There was a national convention so people are waking up to the fact that you have to have people in your country if you're going to have citizens, and those citizens have to be productive. And the most productive people are usually the first to leave. So there was a recent news about some changes that were actually a law that was passed a few months ago, but coming out of Germany, that Germany has a new rule that, as part of their Military Service Modernization Act, that requires men between the ages of 17 and 45 to get permission from the government before those men stay abroad for more than 3 months, even in peacetime. Right? So now you need, if you're a man who can be drafted for a war, now you need army approval to leave Germany. Now, it's not, the officials of Germany say, listen, this is usually approved, but it's rather interesting. Germany is losing a lot of people and a lot of young men, and they're recognizing, hey, we might need these guys. There was an interesting kind of viral moment this last week in Canada where a speaker, I think it was the ex-Google CFO, was speaking at the Liberal National Convention. And he said, listen, we as a government in Canada, we spend so much money on young people in Canada. And so we should require a $500,000 exit tax for any educated Canadian who leaves Canada and goes to the United States, because they can actually get a job in Canada and actually earn money. Because after all, we have to repay the government for that taxpayer-subsidized education. All across the world, some countries are passing new taxes on things like unrealized capital gains. Hey, your investments supposedly went up in value. You haven't sold them and actually proven that they went up in value, but the market says that they're worth more, and so we're going to put some tax on those. And so when these things happen, they can happen, and they can happen quickly. And you have to make a fresh choice. You have to say, what am I going to do? Do I want a plan? I think that all people should have a backup plan. And I think that you and I should have backup plans. That's what I've spent a lot of years of my life building. And it really has never, well, I can't say never. For me, it's not often been about me. It's often been about my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. Because when I look forward in the world, I think there'll be a lot more competition in the future for government services. I think that competitive pressure is actually going to be the thing that makes the difference, and that it'll help to solve a lot of these governmental problems. Let me explain what I mean. Over years ago, I always used to worry about doing deals and doing transactions and things because I always worried I was going to get screwed, that I would make some mistake, I would miss some piece of information, and I would wind up with a bum deal. Over time, I've just come to trust the market more and more. I'm not saying you shouldn't do due diligence, but in reality, if you need to buy a car, you can pretty much go down to the car lot and you can ask to buy a car and they'll tell you how much it is and you hand over the money and you probably just went just fine. If you overpaid, you probably overpaid by 10%. We're not talking a 50% overpayment. Why? Well, because the pressure of the market keeps most free transactions basically honest. Not all. After all, we're starting to talk about fraud, but a lot of them are. So if you go and you buy something, it just works out. Why? Because the pressure of the market is there. And the market is always that great kind of leveling mechanism that it keeps everyone honest, keeps the prices all lined up with each other, and keeps things more or less functioning as they should. It's the pressure, the competition that works. And I think the same thing happens with governments. And so from time to time, you'll have an outlier where government will get really out of whack. But if it gets really out of whack, then they start losing too many people. So think about those comments in the news from Governor Kathy Hochul of New York. New York has basically tapped itself out. And so the governor is standing up against other people and saying, no, we can't make New York more expensive. We can't make it worse. We're already losing too many people. We have to stop, and we have to make New York more attractive. Now, it's a long process, but it's the pressure of the marketplace. I've been amazed over the years in doing tax planning about the United States. The United States is fascinating to me because we have high taxes, but we don't. Meaning that the amount of money we pay in tax is uncomfortable. But for most of us, it's not so egregiously uncomfortable that it becomes the number one thing that we do in our life. I think the United States is basically almost perfectly dialed in the Laffer curve, that optimal number at which you are charging taxes at the highest possible rate that people will pay before they'll just run for the exit. And yes, some people run for the exit and they say, that's it, I don't want to pay taxes. Because remember, taxes are optional. You get to choose where you go. You get to choose what you do. You got to pay the people based upon the situations, but you do get to choose where they are. And so taxes are optional. But the United States kind of has that perfectly dialed in. It's uncomfortable, but it's not so uncomfortable to make it change. So I don't, I think about myself, but I just also think about my children and my grandchildren. I think, I don't know what the world's going to look like 30 years from now, but I know I want to be prepared. I know I want to be ready. And so I think that that this is a component of planning. I don't think it's a primary component. I don't think it's the number one thing. It can be in some situations, right, for many people. But for a lot of people, it's just kind of in the background of, I need to make sure I have plans. And so just think about that as you pay your taxes, as you ponder Tax Freedom Day, as you calculate your numbers and things like that. Ask yourself, am I getting good value for my money? Am I getting good services for my money? And if I am, great. Be happy about it. But make sure you have a plan if in the future you're not getting good services. And if you don't feel like you're getting good value, you're not getting good value from the government, you're not getting the services that you're paying for, then make a plan and change it. Come hear me speak. Hang out with me in Cancun, nomadcapitalist.com/live, nomadcapitalist.com/live. I'll be back with you soon. Thank you.